Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Life of a Doctor, but Not That Kind workshop today. My name is Yvette Gonzalez, and I'll be kind of introducing the presentation. I'm currently a fourth year in biopsychology. Great. So one of the things that we focus on a lot, especially here at Star Scholars, is talking about transferable skills and what skills you can use as you gain through your experiences to be able to apply it to different types of jobs. Some type of skills, some examples of that would be with looking specifically at research is, for example, if you work with people, that might be a transferable skill, being able to work in a group with relational and interpersonal skills. Other things would be things like problem solving and critical thinking. Then looking specifically at communication, being able to talk about your data or give information to different types of groups. That might be something, another skill that could be transferable as well as data science and programming, and many other skills that could be used for different types of jobs.
So I'm Dr. Cindy Lessig, and today we're going to be focusing mostly on non-academic careers. But I also do want to say one of the careers that psychology PhD can prepare you for, is the one that people probably think of the most, is being a professor. And being a professor has, if it's the right career for you, it actually can be pretty great. I often say, I discovered this in high school when I had a initial research experience as part of a senior career week. And I noticed, like, wait a minute, this person that I'm working for gets to research any question that he wants to research, as long as he can convince somebody to give him money for it. And I noticed he rolls in at 10:30 in the morning. Now, what I didn't know at the time was that he was also working until 10:30 at night, and that's the trade-off. But, being a professor, you get to do science you love. You get to work with students, which a lot of us find really rewarding. Both undergraduates and graduate students, you get to communicate with scientists all over the world. So one of the conferences that I go to, it typically has 25 to 30,000 people in it from all over the world. And so you get to communicate with them, you get to visit them a lot. You serve the community in many cases and causes that you care about. One phrase that you might have heard is research is me search. So often many of us research topics that we really feel passionately about. And as I said, you get a somewhat flexible schedule while you're doing it. Professors were in some ways the original work from home people. And, again, you put in a lot of hours, but you do get a decent amount of flexibility. And just to sort of to tease myself and most other professors, you also get the benefit of eternal youth, because if you have ever noticed any of our profile pictures or the pictures that we have up on our webpage, we take them when we first get hired and we almost never remember to update them. So, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you're still 35. Yeah. On the other hand, it is a big commitment and a lot of work. So it's definitely not for everybody. You will spend a lot of your time working on papers, working with students, working on grants. I often say that in some ways, being a professor is kind of like running a small business. Yeah, it's kind of up to you every day, whether you get up and do what you're supposed to do. But on the other hand, it's also very much, you're always have in the back of your mind, like, ooh, is somebody else out there working harder? There's always something else that could be done.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Patricia. I'm a fourth year in developmental. And while we got to hear from Dr. Lustig about all of the benefits of being a professor, we do have a lot of options when it comes to getting these degrees, right? So you can work in things like product design and marketing, video game design, litigation consulting, criminal justice, environmental conservation, business consulting. You can do outreach and communication through the sciences, or work towards reducing health disparities, and many other careers and fields that we'll get to hear about from our panelists. So while the most common route is usually that of the professor, it's definitely not the only one. There are also university-specific services. So like here at the University of Michigan, we have the University Career Alumni Network, which allows you to contact other people that might be in fields that you're interested in. And you have events like today, right? So panels where you get to hear about different opportunities and fields that you may not know are available to you with this career path. So today we're going to get to hear from 4 amazing panelists. Our first one being Dr. Amy Butcher, Dr. Stephanie Chen, Dr. Karthik Ganesan, sorry if I misspelled that, and Dr. Casta. I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher the last name.
Guillaume.
Yeah, thank you so much. So thank you so much for each of our panelists for joining us today. We're excited to get to learn from each of you.
Okay, Brittany, did you want to start off with the first question? And I say we have some initial questions that we can sort of use to guide the conversation. But if any of you who are our guests in there, you have something else either that you want to bring up, or if you are a student that you want to ask about, please do go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so we'll start off with our first question, which is kind of just the basic summary question. How did you end up in your career after your PhD?
I guess I'll start since I'm first on the slide. So I finished my PhD at Michigan in 2006, and I had realized midway through my time there that I was more interested in a non-academic route, but I was really struggling to find information about what that might be. The faculty, because they chose the faculty route themselves, were really most knowledgeable about that. And at the time, I don't think there was a really visible contingent of behavioral scientists in industry, at least not from my vantage point. I remember going to the Office of Career Services and asking for advice, and the person there, who was very nice, really wanted to help, but the best she could offer was that she thought Procter & Gamble might hire PhDs. So sort of left on my own. I knew I wanted to stay in Ann Arbor for the time being. I had just gotten engaged to my now husband, and I ended up sending out something like 50 applications to different jobs. And I was really searching wide, like, what are the skills that I've learned in my PhD program that could translate to a job? So I applied for a lot of research type jobs, and this breaks my own heart knowing what I grew up to be, but a lot of like statistical analysis jobs, which was never my passion, and I've grown further and further away from in my professional roles. But just really trying to see what was out there. And I landed a job as a research manager with an agency in Ferndale, Michigan, that did work in the healthcare space with pharma companies. Realized pretty quickly that the job itself didn't fill my cup, but I loved working in healthcare. There was so much opportunity to apply behavioral science and do really interesting work to help people with their health. And then my next job, I found sort of by accident in Ann Arbor with a startup that had spun out of U of M School of Public Health. So that was sort of where I found my career and my passion, and really realized that I love to do behavioral design. I love to apply psychology to creating digital health experiences that help people shape their behavior in ways that benefit their health and really get them towards their goals. After that first job, that kind of set me on a path that started to make more sense. So I stayed with that company. It was called Health Media, through its acquisition by Johnson & Johnson, and then all the way through 2013 or 14. I had moved back to Boston, where I'm from in the meantime, transitioned to a role at CVS Health as they were opening up their digital innovation center in Boston, then spent 5 years with a company called MadPow in a practice they have called behavior change design. So really applying those same skills in a consultancy sort of way. And then for the last year and a half, I've been with my current company, Lirio. I started as vice president of behavioral design, and now I'm the chief behavioral officer. So I oversee a team of behavioral scientists who are really, building these interventions, but also doing the research to establish their efficacy. And so I feel like I've come full circle in a way. I am actually doing a lot of the same activities you might find in an academic setting, in a different context for a different purpose. But I'm just finding so much of what I learned in grad school is coming back. So it's been an adventure, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
So why don't we keep going in order just to make it a little bit easier. So Dr. Chen?
Sure. Sounds good. I'm Stephanie Chen, not Zoom user. Sorry, I haven't used Zoom in a while. I graduated with my PhD from U of M in 2017. I was in the social psych program. And at the time, I think I definitely really liked the idea of becoming a professor, but I wasn't really sure what else was out there and whether I should consider exploring those things. Just because the job market had just felt pretty intense at the time. There were a lot of opportunities, but I think like looking to apply to places, I didn't have as much flexibility in where I could go. Had a partner, I had kids, and so I was thinking about like maybe just branching out a little bit and exploring other options. But I didn't know where to start. So I knew I like to teach, I like to do research, and I like to learn. So like being a professor seemed like it would hit all of those, and I didn't know if there were other jobs where I could do all of those things, especially in the types of like subject matter area that I've already been studying before. And so for me, I actually had a former colleague reach out, and this person had gone to industry, and so they were working at Facebook, which was not on my radar at all. I didn't even think of like Facebook as being a company with employees. It was just like a website or an app I used once in a while, and that was about it. And so my colleague was like, hey, we've done work before. I know you have X, Y, and Z skills. Would you be interested in just like interviewing for this job on my team? And so I thought, why not? I'm just like kind of in exploration mode, even though I was applying to like faculty jobs and postdocs and things like that. And I actually started doing a postdoc at U of M because I had some like really great research lined up. But I ended up interviewing for the role and a few other roles as well. So this colleague was just super helpful in like hearing the kinds of things I was looking for and the kind of skills I wanted to lean into, which definitely had to do with like methods and stats focus, even though I also wanted to do a lot of like social science research. I just really enjoyed honing in on those technical skills. And so I ended up going to work there for a few years, and just with life change situations, ended up having more kids. We were in the Bay Area. It was very expensive, and I missed my friends and family in the Midwest. So excuse me, my husband got an opportunity to come back here, and I'd been doing remote work for a bit because of the pandemic, and kind of just discovered one thing I really like is remote work's great with the flexibility, but I really like seeing people at least once in a while. When you work in industry, it's really nice to be able to build relationships, and especially if you're in a research role, have influence with what you do with your research. So you're contributing value to the company and not just kind of doing fun projects on your own. And so I had another former colleague from U of M who was at Rocket Mortgage. And so I asked her more about that and the types of work she was doing there. And it seemed like a really great fit. So I applied more broadly, but that was a path that ended up being a good fit for me once we moved back here. So I can go in a little bit during the week to Detroit, but also work from home and have that flexibility. And so those are the two main jobs I've had in industry after graduating.
Hey, I'm Karthik. I graduated from U of M Psychology, Cognitive Neuroscience in 2022, which is like 6 months ago. Before joining U of M, I had been in industry for quite a number of years, and I joined the PhD wanting to get into research and academia. But for several reasons, I started questioning that choice, and I started looking at industry jobs again. But the main motivator was trying to apply what I studied and learned during my PhD. So I was looking for industry jobs where I could apply the skill sets I learned during my PhD. And turns out that my previous job, which I had before my PhD, was a great fit for it. So I basically joined the same place where I was at after the PhD. And of course, it was at a much higher level and a different job profile, but it was pretty much working with the same people again, with the same team again. So that's the short history, not too much like Amy or Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. So I think when I first started graduate school, it was with the intention of knowing that I wanted to do youth development work in different contexts. So prior to graduate school, my background was as a youth program person, and also just like doing youth academic support programs and like youth organizing work in Miami, and also just like some community capacity building work around various topics in some other places. But I think in my experiences of working within community, particularly and community-based organizations, I always thought like, wow, these people come in with like these degrees and they either tell us what to do, or we kind of have to put on this, dance and show for them because they have funding and the money and all that. And I think I was just really intrigued about who are these people that come in with PhDs that get to tell us what to do, essentially, right? And what would it look like for that model to look different, to actually partner with the communities and organizations that you seek to support. So I think I always had like some level of intentionality that I probably wouldn't be a traditional academic, or if I was, I really wanted to ensure that I had community engaged research as part of my work. So yeah, I finished up in the combined program in education and psychology, CPEP, at the University of Michigan in 2020. So during my graduate program, I spent a lot of time still trying to remain connected to youth organizations, probably to the detriment of me taking so long to finish. But it was really informative because I think it allowed me to ground my experiences and what I was studying, and trying to understand like its relevance in real time and doing applied research. So once I finished up, I had a postdoc for a little bit, and then decided, it was the pandemic, so we were just trying to figure things out, but then decided that I really did want to pursue an applied research position. So then I started working for Girls Inc. So at their national office, and they had, so it's kind of like a model like the YWCA, where they have these affiliate locations and everything. So we had 65 locations across the country, and I oversaw their national research and evaluation strategy. And I think in that work, it was cool to bring a community-based lens to a youth development organization and being at a national office. I think I didn't really quite understand what it meant to be at a national office, but really having deeper investment in working in communities a bit more closely. And then now I'm the director of research, learning, and evaluation for the National Equity Project, and we support organizations broadly defined around equity leadership, as well as their work in partnering with young people to co-design schools and the spaces that they learn and grow. So I think across the two roles so far, I have been really surprised at how much my PhD training has been showing up. I think, as is probably the case for many people, when you're going through a graduate program, and even once you're done, you tend to have a lot of imposter syndrome going on and not really thinking you're internalizing everything. So it's a kind of cool feeling to be in a space and be like, oh, wait, I do have skills and things that I can contribute and things that I learned along the way. So I'll stop talking now, but okay.
No, that's actually a terrific introduction to the next question, which is sort of, describe a typical day or week in your job. And if you can sort of suggest a little bit more concretely, like all of you have kind of hinted at how the skills that you got in your PhD have shown up in your job, but maybe if you could make that a little bit more concrete for folks. So tell you what, I will shake things up a little bit on the order here. So Karthik, why don't we jump back to you? I'll keep you guys on your toes.
Okay, day-to-day life. So Deloitte is a consulting firm, and and it's
Why did you do that? I don't want you to do that.
you don't want me to do consulting? Sorry, bro. So Deloitte is a consulting firm, and they basically handle different types of work, but I am in what you could call strategy and analytics. And
Upstairs, Jimbo.
so the main type of work I deal with is data wrangling, data handling, statistical models, building machine learning models, and implementing AI solutions for multiple clients. So it's like working in a startup, because the consulting firms basically get projects from other places. So you get clients who give projects to the consulting firms, and you provide solutions to these clients who ask you for answers. And a day-to-day life in the job is essentially interacting with the client, gathering their requirements, which basically is asking them what problem they want solved. So you define the question that they want answers for, and then you go to the drawing board, you gather your team, and you discuss with them, hey, this client has this problem, so how could we solve this? So you chalk up a plan, a project plan, to come up with a solution for the problem this client has, and you add so I'm a manager in the team, so I also get to delegate tasks to different people. So it's basically like being a professor, but in a industry setting. You call out people and essentially say each one is responsible for a specific task, and you come up with a roadmap for how each of them needs to handle their particular task. And you keep regular check-in points, and you constantly track progress. That's all part of the day-to-day job. And once you come up with a solution, you again go back to the client and say, hey, we have come up with a solution. How does this look to you? 99% of the times they would say this looks bad. So you get back and you go back to the drawing board, you get the feedback from the client, and you refresh your solutions that you want to provide to this client. So that's pretty much what a day-to-day life looks like. And there are a lot of perks. So when you say you gather requirements from clients, so you basically go to the client site wherever the client is located. So in the past 6 months, I have gotten to travel to multiple places. Even right now, I'm in London at a client site. So that's one of the perks of being in a consulting firm. You get to travel a lot. But if you don't like it, then that's not for you. But if you like traveling a lot, then that's definitely a good job for you.
So Karthik, you probably didn't say it because you were busy talking. So a question came up. Is your job mostly remote? It sounds like you've got some traveling going on, so that part at least is in person. Is it hybrid? How does that work for you?
So other than the traveling, which happens like once a month or twice a month, maybe. So the traveling is like totally, it would be maybe for like 4 or 5 days a month. Other than that, I have been to the office once since I joined this job, and that was to collect my laptop. So I work from home otherwise. And this was the same way that it was like even before the pandemic struck. It was all like mostly remote. So consulting is kind of that way. So if you're in a consulting firm, you can be assured that most of the times it could be remote. But of course, it depends on the firm as well. But in general, I would say that there is a very high possibility of it being a remote job.
Great, thanks very much. Stephanie, can I call on you next?
Sure. So for me, I think before I started any of my industry jobs, I didn't really know what to expect, but I thought a typical week would be like, okay, someone comes and tells me what kind of research they need, and then I do it and I give it back to them. It was kind of like my very simple like flow of like how things might work. And that is the case, I think, for a lot of folks who are in like entry level or like simpler or like maybe less mature research orgs, where it's kind of like you have people who are developing a product or who are developing marketing or who are doing what they're doing in the business. And then they kind of, go to the researchers or analysts or data scientists like McDonald's, place an order, get their order and leave. But as you become more senior or as an organization kind of up levels, it's like maturity for what they can get out of research. Especially as like someone with a graduate degree, if that's you, or someone with a lot of experience, you can bring a lot more to the table than just like, okay, this is your question. Okay, here's how I would do the study. And then let me just give that back to you. So what I do in a typical week involves more than just research. That's like a small part of it. But a lot of what I do is also building relationships with people in the company. If you're on a research team, there might already be established stakeholders who you work with. So, people who are developing the website for your company, maybe you've already done some projects for them and they know how you work, they know the value you provide. So you might already have a relationship there, but there might also be other places in the company your team could plug in and provide value. And so for me, I try to meet people and really learn different aspects of the business of where I work. That was true at Meta. And it's true now at Rocket, especially since I'm new and I'm new to like fintech and mortgage industry. So I know very little about the industry, but you can offer a lot more as a researcher if you actually learn the business as well, because then you can start proactively identifying what some of those questions should be or what some of the knowledge gaps are. So people, have always looked at this metric and that metric. And then as you learn, you might be like, oh, it's interesting, we're measuring these things, but what about something else, like from the client's experience? Or we noticed that as they use the product and some of this, usability testing, like they're struggling with this, do we have quantitative data to sort of size the scale of this problem and what can we do to help solve this problem? So what I do mostly is a lot more holistic and less just focused on the research, even though ultimately, once I kind of understand the product, understand the problem, then I like draft research to try to come up with like what the potential solutions or answers could be. And so every week looks different. For me personally, I feel like if I'm doing a lot of meetings or like, sharing out research or building relationships, that drains me in a different kind of way. So I don't get a lot of research done that week. And then some weeks I like to block my calendar off and be like, I'm going to spend, hours and hours every single day. No one talk to me. I'm going to zone in. So it kind of depends. But people have different models and there's some flexibility there depending on how they prefer to work. But yeah, there's always this sort of mix of some of it's just doing the research and then some of it is understanding the business. And then the last piece is presenting the research and making sure that what we learn gets used or at least taken into consideration when important decisions are made, whether it's decisions on how they build out the product or new products they might need to build or new audiences they need to market to, and just kind of making sure that people pay attention to the research when making decisions, because there's usually a lot of inputs and companies are leaning more and more on making data-driven decisions and like justifying their decisions based on evidence, as opposed to like, people's intuition or personal experience or things like that.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like maybe you get to see a more direct impact as opposed to we have to sometimes get it up through Congress, which not everybody gets to do.
Yeah, it moves a lot faster.
Yeah. Casa, can I ask you to go next, please?
Sure. So I think a typical day, I've been trying to like sit with it and I'm just like, I don't really know yet. So I think it depends. I think it depends a lot on the organization and where they are at with their relationship to like research and evaluation is what I found. Because I think like while a lot of organizations, particularly youth serving ones, understand like there is a need to be measuring impact, there is a need to be thinking in these ways, I think organizational readiness is really gonna influence what you actually do every day. So I do think a big part of my role so far, and I'm relatively new to this organization, has been relationship building, but like relationship building through the work, and also just really trying to embed myself in a way to understand what the organizational realities have been, are, and what they, what they seek to be in the future. I also think because of one of the projects that I'm charged with right now is overseeing the evaluation of and just like our learning strategy for so it's just this like sort of multi-stakeholder I don't want to call it a thing because it's a thing, but it's, it has a word. Okay, so it's a project where we're working with 14 school districts across the country. And we're providing them with equity leadership coaching, right? Where they're supporting, so we're supporting like superintendents, principals, teachers, and understanding equity and how that informs their change efforts, but particularly through the lens of how do you center student experience in that? So how do you actually partner and work with students, and what does it mean to have a student in a meeting with a superintendent and them not just be tokenized, right? But them actually having value and voice in all of that. So I think in that way, I feel like I'm also building relationships with our, our external stakeholders, because it's learning about the school districts, their different realities, building trust. And I think, I don't know, I find that the piece of building trust, particularly in social service organizations as it relates to evaluation, is huge, because there just tends to be a really negative connotation about evaluation and what it has meant for people, either in their individual lives or organizationally. And, I try to broaden people's imagination for evaluation and research and learning strategies as a means to, allow us to reimagine ourselves and the work we do. But a lot of times when that's tied with funds and organizational responsibilities, it can become something else. So I think, and I think also if you're in an organization that is more compliance versus just being more expansive, that shows up. So so a typical day for me is spent getting to know people and building trust through a variety of activities, typically like a lot of Zoom, because my position is remote. And so, like meetings, emails, just really trying to understand what sometimes just doesn't always become very clear in onboarding, and kind of using my research skills in that way, like trying to figure out what questions to ask with intention to just give me more grounding and insight. And then, I think depending on like your role or the level of it too, in a lot of these spaces, it's also just this expectation that you'll likely be doing work outside of like the 9 to 5. And sometimes I kind of welcome it, because I actually appreciate the fact when I could just write something down and I don't have to anticipate someone randomly emailing me or disrupting me in those sorts of ways. And I think it's just trying to learn how to organize yourself, because I do think too, in a lot of spaces that want to bring on a evaluation arm or to build that out in an organization, it's a lot of infrastructure building. And I don't know if people are always aware of that, right? Because for you to get to the point of being able to provide an organization with insights, you have to ensure that they actually have processes and infrastructures to do so, and also a culture that will allow them to engage with those ideas and to act upon them. So.
Great, thank you so much. And Karthik just let me know that he has to take off because there is a fire alarm going on in his building. But he has said it would be great to email anybody who has questions and wants to follow up with him later is very welcome to email him, and I'll send that out afterwards. So Amy, can I ask you to go, and hopefully we don't get too much excitement on your end?
Yeah, happy to. And I actually joke that my job is being on Zoom because I have more meetings now than at any point in my career. And it's a function of the level I sit at in the organization and the seniority of it. So as, Chief Behavioral Officer, I'm part of our executive leadership team. And so day to day, I really am not doing the work that I did earlier in my career. I'm no longer the one building the product or running the study. I'm more overseeing those activities, coordinating them, mentoring and coaching the people who do them. And I have a lot of externally facing responsibility as well, representing our company to potential customers and investors. And I should just say Lirio, the company I work for, we're a startup, about 4 years old. We have a product that combines artificial intelligence and behavioral science to help people take action around their health behaviors in a health system context. So things like preventative cancer screenings, wellness visits, immunizations. We basically reach out to people who are overdue on those sorts of activities, and through that use of behavioral science and AI are trying to get them to do the thing, do the recommended healthcare behaviors. As a startup, we are trying to raise money from investors. We're actively trying to acquire new customers. And so I am frequently in those sorts of meetings where I'm talking about what Lirio is and what we do and who's on the team and answering questions on the fly. And then I'm taking that information, I'm helping to build things like proposals, but I'm also bringing it back to my team. The behavioral design team is building our interventions. And so I'm coming back to them and saying, hey, listen, customers are really talking a lot about flu vaccination. Like, let's start to think about what it would take to build that intervention, or, XYZ functionality is something that is coming up in all of these conversations. So really communicating that back, and then touching base with the team frequently to ensure that we're bringing that forward and prioritizing it. Similarly, on the research side, when I get asked questions in these external sorts of environments, a lot of times it's a clue to me, like we need to start to explore the evidence that we might have around these questions. So, and I'll even bigger than that, as a newer startup, we do want to show that our approach is effective. So we have a few randomized control trials that are in flight. I'm the PI, primary investigator, principal investigator on a few of those. I have a colleague who's the lead scientist on the AI team, who's the principal investigator on the others. So we coordinate depending on what that study is more focused on, whether it's more a behavioral science study or an artificial intelligence study. But I'm also thinking about, in terms of our research program, like, how are we really telling a full story about Lirio? Because those RCTs are really, really important to show outcomes, to show efficacy of our approach versus a standard of care. But there are also all sorts of other investigations that are important in a commercial context. So we just published a feasibility study, really just looking at, what does it take to get this thing up and running in a clinical environment? And are we actually reaching patients with it? So a little bit, not quite as rigorous of an evaluation method, but really proving something that our clients need to understand if they're going to move forward with us as one of their vendors. We're also doing research that's more social scientific or social science oriented, social psychology. I'm like, end of the day here for me. But, looking at different sorts of imagery, for example, and seeing if varying the imagery is getting people to respond differently to messaging, feel differently about it, remember the information differently. Trying to patchwork together this more complete picture of how our product works with respect to the science, identify those opportunities for improvement, and kind of keep the wheel turning there. I also do a lot of collaboration with my executive colleagues. I mentioned in the chat, I am a remote employee. Our company is based in Tennessee, and I'm on site today with some of the other executive leaders, really talking about our 2023 roadmap. So bringing together the perspectives of our different teams. We have a chief technology officer, a chief architect, the chief AI scientist that I mentioned. And the four of us together all kind of own different pieces of the product and need to coordinate how those come together. And it's a little bit of negotiating. So to give a concrete example, one of the things that I think is very important from a behavioral science point of view is that we offer our programs in languages other than English. We're committed to health equity. That's part of our research pillars and strategy. And a big piece of health equity is making sure we can reach people whose primary language is not English. But that has all sorts of technical ramifications as well. And so we need to really discuss, what does it mean to be available in these other languages, and how can we put that into milestones and think about launching it, because to just do everything all at once might be too big of a technical lift in light of the other things that team needs to do. So there's a lot of that sort of overarching high level coordination. And then perhaps the most important piece actually is I manage my teams. So I have a team of 7 people total who report to me, divided across behavioral design and behavioral research. And I spend a lot of time with them, really understanding the day-to-day work that they're doing. They're the ones who really make the company run. And But I'm making sure that I'm there to support them, to communicate what the strategy is, to provide, mentorship and advice, and also to learn from them, because I need to understand some of what they're running into to do all of that high level strategy work. So it's a lot. I find I really need to bring my full skill set to bear, but it's really different from any other point in my career in that I'm rarely the one in the weeds. I'm very much sitting atop of it, looking at the 10,000-foot view and trying to make sense of it from that perspective.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just say, like, in some ways, I feel like that's very similar to being a professor. And like one thing that I'm hearing a lot from all of you is, like you're using these skills both of like, okay, what is the right question to ask? Like, what are the limits and parameters I have on like, here's the ideal way to do it. And then like, what actually can I get done? And then also like working with people at different levels, which is definitely something you get a lot of training with in the PhD as well. So thank you all. Okay.
Our next question for you all would be a twofold. What do you enjoy most about your job, and what is the most challenging aspect of that job?
I'm happy to jump in. One of the reasons I took this job, so I was recruited to this company. I was really happy in my last position. I'd been there 5 years, so I was starting to think about what's next. But the reason I specifically chose this opportunity is because there is an AI science team. And I loved the idea of two parallel science teams that collaborate with each other and the opportunity I would have to learn. And it's absolutely my favorite part of the job, learning from that AI team, really figuring out how to integrate our two scientific approaches together. I feel like I learn every single day that I'm at work, and I love the mutual respect that our teams have for each other. It's like a very healthy, functioning relationship, which I haven't always seen at work. So far and away, that's my favorite part of it. And I think the thing that really challenges me is that my job is so many meetings. I sometimes feel like I can't put the preparation and the focus into things that I would like to. And it's hard for me to let go of, wanting to show up completely polished. I really feel a lot of times I have to just have faith that my training and experience will carry me through some of these things. And it's not always comfortable. I don't think it's ideal. Like I really do think in an ideal world, I would scope back my meetings to like 75% of what they are now. But yeah, that's probably the most challenging thing for me.
I can hop in. So I think what I enjoy most is the opportunity to create. Yeah, so I think like being able to have ideas and seeing them become actualized to varying degrees. And I think also have an opportunity to check some of my ideas that sound really great in my head, but in reality aren't like a real thing. And I also see like the work that I'm doing, particularly now, is like a lot of bridging. So it's being able to listen deeply and trying to foster connections to move like strategy forward, or particular types of initiatives. So I guess, yeah, I think there's just like a level of like imagination that I'm able to engage with that I appreciate. I do think that that's really just like my framing of life, though. I do think that like the whole meeting thing and, and just how your time gets occupied is tough. I also think, and I always heard this when I was like in graduate school, but like how slow we move with things in academia, which I was just like, what do you mean? Like, I feel like these milestones and stuff require like urgency, but like when you're actually working in the field and you see how quickly people need things to get things going, or you understand more so just the hierarchies that occupy a lot of organizational spaces. Yeah, it makes, yeah. So I think a challenge for me has been recognizing, I mean, to your previous point, just that I do have training and a skill set, and I need to learn to trust that more so I can just move more efficiently and not miss opportunities to move things forward, because I want to like sit down and do a literature review and make sure that, I've organized all my slides and there's not too many words and there's, all this. So yeah, I think keeping up with the pacing and recognizing that the pacing shifts depending on like the engagement that you're having in these spaces. Because I think there are spaces within my organization where depending on what's being worked on, or if we talk about organizational strategy, there is time to do some of that long-term planning, right? But that long-term planning or organizational strategy is very much informed by how much I can pick up and act on in shorter, with shorter bursts of lead time, I'd say. So.
I can definitely relate to the themes that came up, so I don't have anything completely new to add. I think I'm still new at my role at Rocket, so I'm still kind of figuring out what are the like highlights and lowlights of working there. But I think one thing that's held true with like my expectations and then how the job has played out is just my ability to keep learning. And I think Amy alluded to that as something that she likes in her type of work. And I think a lot of us, like if you go to grad school, you like learning, like we all maybe learn differently or want to use what we learn differently, but it's like, I definitely found, you know, in the past, if I stay in a role for too long and things get kind of monotonous, I start thinking like, okay, you know, what else can I learn while I'm here? Or do I need to like jump and, you know, do something else? And before I joined, I interviewed with the team, and the lead of the team actually had started without a research background, but she was passionate about certain questions that she saw. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, so I'm probably going to cough a lot. But she was curious about questions that she had about client experience and how it was being measured and how we could improve on that. And so the company gave her like flexibility to like pursue that passion and then just switch her title and get the skills she needed to launch an entire like research program around that. And so I really like what I've seen so far in terms of them giving people room to like learn and pursue like the areas of learning they want to learn more about, basically. So for me, that includes learning just how to use new tools that the team hasn't conventionally used. And I'm like, you know, I have a data science background, and the data science here, you know, get to use these tools and we don't. Why is that? You know, is there any legal reason? If not, I'm going to keep knocking on doors to get access to all this stuff. And like, you know, doors have kind of been opening. People have been accommodating where they can. So I really just enjoy that kind of freedom. And then the short answer for like things that are not so great is just meetings. We are empowered to kind of like, you know, manage that. You don't have to go to every meeting you're invited to. But sometimes it's kind of like, I look back on a week and it's like, I'm a little more drained than I would want to be from meetings. But that's something that I think depending on like the culture of the company, some places do give you more wiggle room to kind of like set your schedule and prioritize among that.
Yvette, did you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I wanted to also open it up in case anybody has any questions. Feel free to put in the chat or just, you know, speak up, but otherwise I can go on to the next question.
Maybe we have one in the chat. Oh, no, somebody has a kid. Stephanie's got to deal with it.
Okay. So the next question is, what surprised you most about your job? And I think we could start with Dr. Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I think a thing this is something I still do. It doesn't surprise me anymore, but pretty early in my career, I was surprised by how much I had to work with sales and support sales. So for a lot of my career, I've been a person who travels with the sales team, you know, to talk about the behavior science in our products and in our approach. I just didn't realize that subject matter experts were part of that sort of conversation. The other thing that surprised me though, because I'm not very good, like I'm not good at asking for money. You know, I'm not a very assertive person when it comes to some of these sorts of things. But I really enjoy the sales support work I do because it gets me in front of people who are considering our product, you know, and I get to hear firsthand what their questions are, what their concerns are, what they're responding positively to. It's a really valuable source of feedback for my actual like design work, or now to communicate that to the designers on my team. So I actually really, really enjoy it. And I think it's one of the more valuable developmental opportunities I've had, even though I'm not always comfortable when it gets to the part of the conversation where it's like sign on the dotted line. Fortunately, that's not my responsibility though either.
And yeah.
I think I don't know, I feel like I'm surprised every day by something, but I think like, I think part of it, I think one of the larger things is understanding that people have very broad conceptualizations about data, what they believe it is, and what constitutes like reliable data to be working on, right? Or working with, or to be making decisions from. And I think just like people's relationships to data and its utilization. And I think it just shows up in a variety of ways, internally and also just externally, because I think a lot is dependent on being able to demonstrate organizational impact, but then also when you kind of look at how they're operationalizing impact, it becomes a little bit curious in a lot of spaces, and how what counts as supporting communities, particularly like historically marginalized ones. So I think that's surprising. I also think the relationship between the funding community and social service work is an interesting one, and the sort of lack of a bidirectional influence of social science research on the funding community. I think selectively you are able to, get a white paper put out, and maybe, some angles are added on like a call for proposals. But I think I've just been a bit surprised at how much bridging work is still needed, and how siloed like the youth development field really is. And yeah, how there's just a lot of a limited capacity for that to be prioritized for, different ways, and a lot of opportunity for it to be prioritized. But I think that's just something that increasingly surprises me. Like, oh, this is a thing, like this is built into this is built into to like the work that we do. So like, yeah, so I think having to overcome that, and also I think I've been surprised that in a good way, the importance of finding community and people who are seeing things the same way as you do, to just maintain that motivation and, support like strategizing.
Great, thank you so much. So Stephanie, are you back, or is the baby is the current challenge and surprise, I think. So, so Amy, oh no, there you are, great. Thanks so much.
Sorry, I just got back, but I missed the question, so I can take a crack at it, or we can
So
also move on.
the question is basically something that, either surprised you about your role, or that other people might find surprising about it.
Okay. I think I'm surprised just because of how things worked at my last company, and it was a much bigger research division, how much visibility research gets with leadership. So I've been with Rocket only a couple months, and a couple weeks ago, I got less than 24 hours notice that the CEO and like his staff all wanted to see like a project we were working on. And I panicked extremely, but it went fine. And they were all just kind of curious to get like a sneak peek at like what the results were going to be. And so I was just really surprised that that can happen. So like now I'm on my toes, but they just pay a lot more attention to it. It's a smaller team, and there's a lot more like faster communication. I think if you work in a really, really big org, then it might be, a lot more layers between everybody. Things might move more slowly. So that's been a surprise. That's like mostly a good thing, but like, I don't know, it was kind of frightening at first. So.
Great, thank you very much. So Karsa, I'll bounce back to you for this first one, if it's okay. So I guess, do you have any advice for either undergraduates or graduates who are thinking about doing the PhD, or, who are coming to the end of their PhD, and especially, sort of about remaining focused on your goals through, what can be a very long reward delayed process. And I know you mentioned that, like in some ways that you sort of built that into yours by having maybe some of the community focused aspects at the beginning of it, but that, you sort of felt that there were some trade-offs there too, maybe.
Yeah, I think, because I think especially like when I was finishing up, like it just felt like all these opportunities were popping up that felt a lot more attractive than trying to get through your dissertation. And I think also when you're just like at the point where you're like, as I think especially if you don't want to be in academia, you're just kind of like, what is this for? And then, okay, let me focus. Okay, so yes, so I think what was very helpful to me was that I started going on job interviews while I was dissertating. Now, this was helpful because I think it allowed me to just understand what it meant to get a job outside of academia, and that's really a skill set and a muscle that you have to practice, or just have some exposure to in order to demystify it for yourself. Yes, so I think that was really helpful. I think also as I was finishing up, it was really important for me to remain in contact with students who, or I guess folks who finished ahead of me, right? So people who I might have met like my first or second year, who were out, who saw the thing through, who might have been in academia, might have not been, right? But they were able to help me to recognize where I was in the process, because it just becomes very like foggy. And I think also trying to identify opportunities to create some sort of tangible, or to know like I was making tangible progress towards something. So I got really into like jigsaw puzzles, because I was just like, it felt like it was just the perfect metaphor for the PhD process for the dissertation, where it was just like, okay, I don't really know what's happening, but sometimes like the pieces are coming together. I just kind of have to remain focused on what the picture is on this box, but not like too focused on it, and actually letting the pieces speak to each other and all that. And then I also got into just working out a bit more, really with no real goals there, but it was just nice to just have measurable progress on something. And it's just like, oh, this next week I was able to lift 5 more pounds. And I felt like that was just very motivating to me. And I think through the process, just really learning and being honest about, one, how you learn and how you actually work, and when you work well, and what helps to motivate you. Because I think a lot of times you can read like the handbooks and go to panels and all this, and people can talk about their own experiences, but I think it's really important to reflect on your own practices and goals as well. So I think that was your question. So I'll stop there, but yes.
Great, thanks. I was just about to say, like, I think that's a part of why many of us like teaching, because when you finished a class session, when you finished grading something. And I personally resonate a lot with what you're saying about the working out aspect too, because it has both those concrete rewards, and it's also just really good for your mental health. Amy, can I bounce back to you?
Yeah. And actually it's funny because I got really into working out too, like in my last couple of years of grad school. And I think it was for the reasons that you mentioned. And, of course, the physical release of it, like kind of burning off stress that way. But I think also because it was one of the few times where I could do something and not feel guilty that I wasn't working on my dissertation, because like there's no real way to multitask that. And it's this temptation bundling wasn't a known thing at the time, but I definitely did. I subscribed to all these trashy magazines and I'd like read them on the elliptical. So that was a big part of it. I also had a good friend group and we would write together. So, we were all dissertating at the same time. We would rotate coffee shops, like God bless Sweetwater. They were so nice to us, letting us spend like 12 hours a day there and spending maybe $6 on our tiny grad student budgets. But having other people to go through that slog with, and, we would, hey, does this page make sense? Can you take a look at this? Do you have a citation for this? Like all those sorts of things are really helpful and help you feel like you're not in it alone. I'm also a really like type A milestone oriented person, and my advisor wasn't particular. He was sort of like, yeah, you'll get it done when you get it done. And I was like, no, that's not how we work here. So I wrote my own schedule of, this is when you're going to get the drafts of the chapters, and gave it to him and asked him to please hold me to it. And he agreed to. He did. Like he would email me in advance of those dates and be like, hey, you owe me this draft on this date. And that was very helpful to me. Like I do really, really well with these specific dates to aim for. I wrote a book a few years ago and I used the same process in that process. So, had my editor sort of hold me to all of these milestone dates. It's not a very inspiring tactic, but it worked a lot for me. The part that was really hard was I actually didn't know what my bigger goals were. I knew that I didn't want to go on the academic job market, but like I said, I really struggled with finding that first job and figuring out what it should be. And so I didn't have a really like concrete goal to push for except finishing. And I think I was fortunate that between the other tactics like the social support and I actually really liked what I was doing too, and that helped as well. Like it's not like I hated my research or anything like that. So, being invested in making it the best it could be. But I wish, like, if there was one ingredient I could add to my own grad school experience, it would be some sort of vision of the future that would make me feel excited about the consequences of finishing that PhD. That was the piece I was missing.
Great, thank you. So that might be where the talking to the people who made it over the hill already comes in. Stephanie, can I ask you to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the question again? My toddler made an appearance again.
Sure. So just sort of advice for either undergraduates or graduate students who are thinking about your career, and then also kind of about getting through the PhD process and staying focused on those long-term goals when they often are very far away.
I think a lot of the tactics I used were similar, so I won't repeat them, but yeah, definitely social support, writing together with people. Well, I did not exercise. That was one thing, like kudos to you guys. I told my doctor I was exercising when I was pregnant, but I was not. But I think for me, I definitely share that sense of like, I enjoyed the journey, not every minute of it. It's hard, it's grueling, but I generally enjoyed it. I was learning, I was doing research, but I didn't have like necessarily a tangible goal at the end of what's next, besides like, maybe I'll be a professor, but maybe something else, question mark. So for me, I think part of what kept me going was just, this might sound bleak, but just the thought of like, when I wanted to quit, just thinking like, probably for a lot of folks, the difference between finishing the program and not finishing is just deciding to finish it. Like it's as simple as like just deciding not to quit. Just because it's tough right now doesn't mean like, I'm a worse student than everybody else, like kind of talking to other people, everyone, I don't know if this is like well researched, but like anecdotally, it seems like, there's a slump at some point. It's not like a linear journey of like, you just get better and better and smarter and smarter. At some point, it's just sort of like, oh man, I know nothing. And like, this is like not going well. But just sort of like making the decision to just continue. But at the same time, there have been other parts in my career where I step back and think a lot of my decision making is being driven by what I should do. So like, oh, you should finish because like, people would be really proud of you if you finished, or like, you don't want to be a quitter, or you should quit because you have these other life priorities. And just, at least for me personally, I think there are a lot of voices of like expectations and what you should do. And kind of clearing that out and saying like, what makes sense for me in my situation? I'm not everybody else. What do I value? What do I care about? And so in some instances, like during the PhD process, it was pausing and taking a check. Like, am I finishing just to finish, or do I, really want to achieve this just, for my own purposes? And for work, there have been times where I made a decision that was different. Instead of pushing through, I said, nope, I'm going to stop that and try something else because I want to learn something new. So like I forewent a likely promotion, and that was hard because it was like, I should want that, right? Or I forewent a manager position, and I thought like, well, I should want that because like in industry, some companies will let you advance really far up as an individual contributor, but sometimes you have to shift over to leadership if you want to like advance your career. And that's a good thing to do, but like pausing and thinking for myself at the time, like what makes sense for me, and getting advice from people, but not letting it be entirely driven like by this unexamined, just like adherence to expectations, I guess, is my main piece of advice. Take those pauses and step back and kind of reevaluate and make the decision that makes sense for you, whether it's to keep going or to pivot and try something else.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll bet one more time for questions from the audience. If not, Ana Patricia, if you want to ask the next one.
I have a quick question.
Great.
So first, I just want to say thank you for everyone who has come to the panel. This has been really helpful. So one question that I have that I know a lot of people are probably dealing with is when you are starting that transition to non-academic jobs, sometimes looking at job descriptions for various companies can be overwhelming or not come off in the same way that, not use the same kind of language that you're familiar with. So I was curious what some of the tactics or advice that you would give when it came to looking at, those job descriptions for the first set of jobs that you do, and things to look out for, things not to necessarily pay much attention to, and what that process has been like for you.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this one, and especially because I started my career in a time where there were very few industry roles that specified they needed a behavioral scientist. My tactic then, and I think it still works now, is I would isolate like skills that I had or deliverables that I knew I could produce and use those as the search terms instead of the job title, because companies will call the same job all kinds of different things. And I've even found the sorts of roles that I've done, because I've often been in like a product design sort of group. But sometimes that falls in like a digital organization. Sometimes it's in a marketing organization. Sometimes it is in the product organization. Like there's no really great, reliable way to find by role title that I've found. I am going to give a brief plug. There is a free weekly newsletter called Habit Weekly, but they also have a Slack community. And that Slack community is a really nice place to meet other behavioral scientists, including people who are, still in school, coming out of school. There's sometimes people who share job postings there. And so that can be a really good way to get some, nuggets about potential career opportunities or to network with people who are doing different types of jobs. And I would recommend that now to anybody who is looking for those jobs as a way to help weed through some of those job descriptions. In terms of what to pay attention to versus not pay attention to, just as a general piece of advice, those job descriptions are usually aspirational. They're describing an ideal candidate who probably doesn't really exist. And you should feel confident going forward and applying if you meet, I'd say more than half, but certainly not all of the criteria that are listed in that job description. I think most of the people that I've hired and been very happy, grateful to have hired because they're incredible additions to my team. They don't check every single box. So just as you look at those, I think coming out of school, you can sort of be like, oh gosh, no, I don't have all the skills I need, but you really do. You'll be surprised. And I think having made it through a PhD program, you've also demonstrated the type of grit that will help you be successful at, checking those other boxes over time. So no specific items that I would say disregard or over index on, but just when you look at the totality of it, don't feel like you have to check every box. You really don't.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what was useful for me was finding people who were in a variety of industries to just like look over my cover letter, look over my resume, and helping to make sure that I wasn't using jargon, because I think there's a lot that we internalize that we might not be recognizing about how we are representing our experiences. I think some advice that I got was, depending on the organization, and I think this varies quite widely, but depending on the organization, they're really only spending like a few minutes looking at your resume. So how is it that you can be using the words to catch their attention and all of that? But I also think this piece that Amy mentioned around, oh wait, no, you said something about the, yeah, so I think when you're looking, I think what surprised me a lot, and I think even in the process of hiring people was, again, like I do think, yeah, this is what you said, Amy, the piece around that these job descriptions are written with a lot of aspirations and sometimes a lack of clarity about like what you're actually doing. And what's funny is in a lot of these interviews, it kind of feels like they're refining what they want based off of what you're actually telling them, which is just a curious position to be in. So yeah, I think really having someone who has who's had experience applying for industry-based jobs, helping to translate for you what they're actually saying, and also taking your experiences and recognize how to translate it as well. I think that bi-directional work is important, and having a few people like in your back pocket to support you with that. I also paid like a lot of money for someone to redo my resume for me, and I did not find that to be a really great investment. I think it would depend on, I would just say with those services, ensure that you know a few people who've worked with people beforehand, because or else it kind of sounds like very broad language that we just see on LinkedIn everywhere versus like, you know, actually tailoring it to your skills. And also someone who's actually worked with translating someone's CV into a resume, because that's a very particular skill set. And a lot of times I'm not, so I would just be careful with that. And I think it's really important to just talk to people and just figure out like what people do. Like, you know, just approach people to have like lunch or coffee virtually, even if it's like 15 minutes. Because I think what was helpful to me was the more that I was able to talk about the work that I wanted to do, I was able to learn how various folks actually describe that work, so that when I would see job opportunities, I was like, oh, wait, that is what I'm talking about, even though I wouldn't have immediately known that had someone not helped me with that translational piece. And I think you never know when those relationships just come back around too. So I think it's just good to, just to start building a network that way. But like an authentic one, right? Not just like using people just for the hell of it, but really just having curiosities about what they do. And
I think that's amazing advice.
For sure. I'll try to add a couple things to like not be redundant. One thing that's really tangible that I did was I would read job descriptions and just literally like highlight keywords or phrases and made sure I used the ones that were relevant. Like if it was a skill I didn't have, I didn't put it in there, but like I was using that type of language in my resume. And as I prepared for interviews, I would kind of like take notes on that language and practice using it ahead of time, so it would just feel natural, because like I'd never talked about KPIs in my life or like anything like that. So just sort of like, and then if you have people you can ask about, you know, industry terms, great. If you don't, like Google it. I did a lot of that too. Another thing that I think helps with potential sort of like imposter syndrome, where like you see the job description and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't like do any of these jobs. No one will hire me. Is to take it apart, list out the skills that they're looking for, and really take the time to come up with examples of how you've demonstrated those skills. So I think like a lot of times for me, I would get hung up on certain language that I was just used to using. So I'd get trapped into thinking analysis. All I do is analysis. And like, that's totally not true, right? Like I project manage, I do a lot of different things. But it really takes time to like kind of pause and like think of examples of each one. And I think for me anyway, that builds a lot of confidence that I can do those things, instead of just thinking to myself, like, no, people overstate what they want. You can do it. It's fine. Like that doesn't work for me. Like I know everyone says apply anyway. And I'm like, nope, don't want to do it. But if I sit and really write down examples of everything, even if they're really small examples, I feel a lot better and a lot more confident applying to jobs that might seem out of my reach at first. The last piece of advice I want to give, that's not exactly what the question is about, but might help you like assess what kind of jobs to apply for, is map out not only like the skills you have versus don't have, so like what you're good at versus bad at, but also like on another axis, what you like and what you hate. Because I think sometimes we're like, okay, you know, I got to get a job, so here's the things I can do, and I'll take whatever job that matches my skills. But sometimes the things we're good at, we actually hate doing, and we don't even realize it. But it's just like, that really drained me, you know. But if like for me personally, you know, meetings, they're a part of work, and like I don't hate them fully, but they're not my favorite thing, even though like I tend to run them well, I set agendas and communicate well and blah blah blah. But it's just like I don't want a job that over indexes on that. But like when I do analyses, I lose track of time. It's exciting. I'm willing to get up early to do them. So like kind of identifying those things where you can try to get a little more in that sweet spot of things you're good at and like, and not get trapped into something where it's like you have to do too much of something that you're good at, but really kind of drains you. So that's just one piece of advice I found helpful for like trying to find the job that's really gonna let you flourish.
Thank you so much, everyone. As we approach the last 10 minutes of our panels, I wanted to give each of the panelists an opportunity to give us any closing remarks, any final advice, words of wisdom that you would like to impart on any of the people that are still here.
I think when you start graduate school with a pretty firm idea that you don't want to be an academic potentially, I think there, at least for me, I think I made assumptions about that I was not an academic. And then when I got into these spaces, I realized like they view you as an academic because you have a PhD. So I think it's been really like a whole identity sort of integration thing happening that I think is very common. So I guess I would just encourage you to be patient with that, because I do think when you have a PhD, and I think like when you just spend so much time around academics, you don't really recognize like what a unique lived experience that is, and the way that, you know, that is a socialization experience that deeply impacts you and how you show up in the world. Too, I also think like just allowing yourself a space and opportunity to utilize graduate school in a way to figure things out, which I know a lot of people don't say aloud, because it often feels like you're supposed to show up there, know what you want, know what you're going to solve for, like, you know, in the next 20 years and all of this. But the reality is, I think it's a really cool opportunity to leverage the time to learn about yourself and to connect with others in ways to inform what you want your goals or life to look like. So I would just encourage you to really utilize the time to your advantage, and just really maximizing the connections with people and the exposure to just new ideas in space, because you really won't have that time again. And I always heard people say that, and I was like, that's not true. I'm sure I can make the time, but you really won't. So it's just like just trying to find the time to kind of exist in community with others. I think it's just a really powerful experience to have, particularly now as you just figure out what's next for yourself.
Yeah, I feel like that was such a grandiose question, and I don't have a real grandiose answer. I mentioned grit before, and I think that is a thing that you shouldn't lose sight of. It's hard when you're in the thick of it to really appreciate how hard getting your PhD is. It was only with some hindsight that I was able to look back and be like, oh my gosh, that was an all-consuming, you know, multi-year endeavor. And it was really, really difficult. And I think that's the case for most people. You know, certainly most of the PhDs who are my friends and my colleagues, like we all sort of share this, like, oh, holy shit, we made it through. Those skills, like that characteristic that got you through those years, is something that you can apply to any hard thing that you have coming up in your future. And there's definitely been times in my professional life when I've been faced with a challenge, and I've been able to sort of ground myself with thinking like, you made it through your PhD. This is not getting a PhD here. You know, as hard as this problem might be, when you're out in the professional world, oftentimes you have collaborators in a way that, you know, the dissertation is a solo endeavor like that. And I think that makes it different from anything else you're going to do in your professional life. I've really enjoyed the fact that I do have a team, and it's not a sign of weakness. I'll speak only for myself here, because I know in some workplaces this is not the case, but in the workplaces where I have really spent time and thrived, they have been collaborative workplaces where asking for help, asking for collaboration is more of a sign of strength than weakness, where it's, you know, viewed that other viewpoints and backgrounds will add to the success of a project. And it's just such a freeing feeling to be like, I don't have to do this alone the way I had to do some other things in my background alone. And I will lastly just say too that, you know, I think it's a real gift to be able to collaborate with other people. And one of the places where I've seen folks with a PhD struggle a bit in industry is breaking out of that mindset that they have to be the one, you know, that it's their research program and they have to become the world expert in whatever topic. That's not really the case most of the time in industry. It's you succeed with your team. You don't really succeed without your team. And so just keeping those people close and working together, that'll take you far.
I think my parting piece of advice is just, or I guess it's more of a statement. It's okay to not have things mapped out in a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or even like a 1-year plan. I think I'm definitely a planner, like plan research, like ask questions or have a whole protocol and flow it goes through. But I think the more I talk to younger colleagues or even like former students who are reaching out to me now, like, hey, you have career advice and stuff. I found like most of my advice is not like do these 3 steps and then you will have this trajectory and that's how it is. And so I think part of that is just because of how the job market has changed and industries have changed. Where I work at now, they do mortgages. It was completely revolutionized by the internet. The way we do mortgages today is not at all, I mean, there's some similarities, but it's not at all how like it was done, in the 80s and 90s. And so like, it's okay, like as the, job market changes to not have everything mapped out. I don't think that's as much of an expectation anymore. But I think the best thing you can do is to just make your plans and talk to people, but hold them loosely. And be open to different opportunities, even if you think you're set on something. At least for myself, my first job was completely unexpected and not the direction I thought I was going to go in. And then I'll try to find a link to it, just one little tangible resource. There's a book called What Colors Your Parachute? And I just personally found that really helpful. I didn't discover it till years after I graduated, but I took a pause between jobs and was kind of trying to like reassess, what is my path? And like, it's not linear, but like, what should my next step be? And I found it super, super helpful. So I'll try to drop the link into the chat if I can find it.
Great, yeah, and if you don't find it now, I can include it. As I said, I'll send an email out to folks who registered today, because also to pass on Karthik's email and so on. So thank you all so much. I just really appreciate you spending the time out of what are clearly very busy and active schedules to come and talk with us today and give us such great advice.
Well, thank you for having us. This was something I was excited about because, like I said, I struggled when I was approaching graduation. So it gives me all the warm and fuzzies that this is happening.
Well, thank you. All right, well, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.